Welcome back to the Digital Accessibility Podcast. If you're looking to learn more about the field of accessibility, how to implement it within your role or your company, or to get advice on where to start or see how others have navigated complex issues that you may find along the way, then you're in the right place. I'm honoured to be able to share these insightful chats with thought leaders, advocates and practitioners of digital accessibility throughout this podcast, and I hope you'll find it a useful resource. As always, thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy the chat. Today, I'm joined by Mimouna Mahdaoui, a transformational leader specializing in creating inclusive products and partnerships. Mim, as she's also known as, is currently working with the Stepstone Group, which is a global online recruiting platform, which helps to connect talent with employers across over 30 different countries. They have millions of users and are doing such important work to ensure that people are able to source the right job or career for them. Mim has created and delivered incredible accessibility workshops and labs for Stepstone staff and their external partners, which helps to ensure that there's a more ingrained understanding of accessibility throughout the organisation and beyond, which I hope we'll hear a bit more about today. So welcome to the podcast, Mim.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you for having me.
You're more than welcome. Yeah, very pleased to have you here. I know we've met a couple of times in recent months. TechShare Pro, I think, was the last time we met at the evening. Yeah. And yeah, I think that's where a lot of these questions sort of stemmed from. But for the listeners that may not have had the pleasure of speaking to you before or know what you do, could you just sort of share a bit about your journey and what led you to a career focused on building inclusive and accessible digital products?
For sure. It's actually quite an interesting one, which is going to take me a couple of minutes to explain because nothing really prepared me to work on accessibility, I have to say. My background actually is in content marketing, in SEO particularly. So I started doing that many years ago now, and did that for a couple of different businesses, one in education, one in travel, and I ended up at Total Jobs, which is part of the Stepstone Group, 9 years ago now, and really focusing on building content marketing campaigns, which were built on data and research primarily, and actually sort of like unconsciously, I guess, I delivered a lot of campaigns in relation to diversity and inclusion, which is not something we would call like that at the time, and a lot around workplace well-being as well. So we drove a lot of campaigns and media coverage as well in the UK, but also a little bit globally at times, luckily enough, I would say, around those employee topics. And there was really a range of subjects that we covered. There were things that were quite lighthearted, like why does it matter to take your lunch break? All the way down to things such as like emotions in the workplace and anything that connects with a display of emotion. Is it good or is it bad? And things in relation to also like gender when it comes to that. And I have to say, by the way, men are far more emotional than women in the workplace, but I'll just leave it there.
I agree.
And then on the kind of like other end, we did much more kind of like advanced campaign, I would say, in terms of the topics and the framing of those topics. So a lot around gender equality, masking in the workplace, trans employee inclusion, and so on. So there was really a range. And actually, one of the last campaigns that I've worked on in this role for Stepstone was the Gender Bias Decoder, which was a project that we did to identify in job adverts terminology that may be off-putting to women in particular, but not only. And that really kind of like came at kind of like the end of my journey in content, but opening that door for diversity and inclusion in my role. So looking back in 2020, we had a combination of the pandemic, the Black Lives Matter movement picking up globally, that acronym of DE&I becoming the very trendy thing for businesses. And that basically shaped how my role changed. So alongside that, I worked with colleagues in building our employee resource groups internally. So there was really like this momentum in a way. And basically a few months later and really kicking off in the start of 2022, my role really changed to become basically a partner for all of my product and tech colleagues, which are many, in trying to build more inclusion in the product development processes. So making sure that when we say we want everyone to find the right job as a business, everyone really means everyone. So that's basically what got me there. The primary focus at the start, because that was the familiar area, was around gender equality. But beyond that, we looked at things in relation to, for example, social mobility as well a little bit, and then accessibility just took all of my time, which is a good thing.
Indeed, yeah. I mean, it's such a complex and nuanced sort of area to be focusing on. So I guess it keeps you very much very busy.
Absolutely. I'm not bored.
That's good to hear it. And it's interesting. Obviously, I work in the recruitment space and use some of the Stepstone Group's products. And what you've mentioned about the gender bias decoder, we have something similar on one of our sort of distribution platforms for our job specs, and it's something that we're very conscious of to make sure that it's neutral. Some people might misread that as everything has to be, you know, going towards quotas or aimed purely at people in minority groups, but actually it's just cutting out all of the noise and making sure that it's, you know, it speaks to everyone, like you said, and that means absolutely everyone. So no, it's really good. Sorry to teach you to suck eggs and tell you everything you already know, but it's just, yeah, it's interesting to me, obviously, being in that space.
It's nice to hear from a recruiter, actually, that it's something that you pay attention to as well. So
Yeah, well, we try and pride ourselves on that, and I mean, I'd be such a hypocrite if I didn't, working to try and help in the accessibility space. So yeah, thank you. But awesome. And then so we've spoken obviously a few times, and we mentioned about the ingrained feeling of imposter syndrome. So not just within accessibility. So I know that's mostly been your focus over the last 2 years, but across all professions as well. So. Um, could you, if you don't mind, would you explain any experience you've had with that, transitioning obviously between different roles and different focus areas, and why you think it might be quite prevalent, especially within accessibility?
yeah, for sure. I mean, I struggled so much with imposter syndrome or phenomenon, as it should be. That's one of the things I've learned over the years. And I actually did a campaign back then about imposter phenomenon because I just wanted to get data and understand better what it meant and why I was having those feelings sometimes. Um, and I think for me, throughout my career, I sort of pinned down the fact that sometimes I really feel like this fraud or that I don't know anything about what I'm doing, which is primarily how it displays for me. It's not necessarily the case for everyone. Um, because nothing really prepared me for any of my jobs, actually, even the first one in content. I come from a background in trade and things in relation to exporting goods, logistics, regulations, and stuff like that. So nothing really got me there in a way that felt natural or normal, even though everything in my career progression actually really felt very natural and a logical kind of like progression overall. But I
Right.
never learned other than learning on the job. I never really had people I could spar with as such in understanding, okay, how can I do my job better? It's been a lot of self reflection over time, which is fine, but also gives you that sense of like, is it really right? Like, how can I make sure that it's the right thing to do or the right way to approach a process or anything like that? So I think there's a lot that is down to what got us where we are and whether we can be having that feeling of satisfaction about what we actually do and how we can measure that success, whether it's a big or small success. But every win is a win for me, and especially in the world of accessibility. And I think for accessibility, it's particularly true that, and that's pretty much the consensus across the whole community, accessibility is not taught at all or barely taught in university curriculums, in learning and development programs. It's barely there. So we really have to learn on the job, which, I mean, it's a vast area. We can't learn it all, even though I'm sure lots of people have very, very, very deep knowledge because they've spent decades in this industry already. But a lot of people like me are quite new to this, and there's so much to catch up on. Between the technical regulations, between the kind of like the legislation now that we have, especially in Europe, between how you code, how you communicate, how to be inclusive in your events, in your workplace. Like there's so much that you could think about. And I think there's a difficulty for accessibility professionals in particular, not only because there's a lack of education in the most literal sense of it, but also there's a lot of misunderstanding what those roles are and what our job is ultimately, because what we tend to see is that, oh, there's an opening for an accessibility role. Now, I think you will have seen that in your own work experience at the moment, that if you have an accessibility role, you're not just a jack of all trades. You have to really do everything and know everything about all the possible areas of accessibility. So you see a job description and you go, like, okay, I need to have those skills in WCAG standards, and I need to know the European legislation, and I need to know the ADA, and I know how to do remediation, and I need to know how to do an audit, and I also need to coach teams, and I need to be able to present to the leadership team, and I need to communicate and host those workshops and do the training and potentially have a break eventually. So it's like everything is clumped under that accessibility fit. And ultimately, what we also know is that in a lot of businesses, an accessibility team is one person, maybe 3 or 4 potentially, but it's very rare that there's an actual structured accessibility team in a lot of businesses, even the biggest ones. So I think there's a lot around that that doesn't help accessibility professionals also feeling not so much like a fraud. And I think there's also a challenge in the fact that I think sometimes most of the time, I would say 95% of the time, the community is super welcoming, very kind to one another. There's a lot of sharing experiences, sharing assets, understanding how we can kind of like learn from one another, sharing the wins, sharing the lowlights as well. But sometimes, and I've seen that a few times, especially on social media, there's a few people who just do not hesitate to shut down. Like you would say, oh, I've got this win today about, I don't know, one developer has actually applied the right type of semantic to a specific piece of a product. And then someone would go like, yeah, but every single other page on your website is bad. And there's very little to get this kind of like feel good moment, because there's always going to be an element that makes you feel like, oh, actually, I've not done enough, because someone will be nasty about it.
Mm.
Or you don't have someone to give you that validation, and not necessarily the pat on the back, but tell you like, this is important, that matters, and you're doing it well, even though you may not feel it. So I think there's a combination really of things, which is particularly true in the accessibility community, which definitely harms not necessarily the work that you do, but the confidence in yourself simply. And I think that's one part where I'm super glad that the accessibility community, generally speaking, is so supportive. Because without that, I'm not sure I would be able to kind of like feel so positive about the progress we're making. Because at the Stepstone Group, I've always been very honest about that. We are making progress, but it's very slow because we are really trying to build that culture around accessibility. And when you need to really count your wins and put those feelings that you are not necessarily feeling so great about yourself or your deliverables all the time, it can be very challenging. So there are some tactics to try and prevent feeling so much like an imposter. I've been very bad at following them. But there are some, and I really encourage people to at least if you don't keep a record of all your wins, at least take the time sometimes to look at what you've just done and be like, okay, that's actually progress, and that's positive. And oh, actually someone came to me and asked me this question about something, so that means they trust me and what I say is valid type of thing. So that would be my main advice, if I can give any sort of advice to anyone in this space.
Oh, amazing. Well, I think, well, I mean, it seems you're doing really well, and that's what when I gave you feedback from the accessibility lab that I was very honored to have been part of. I it was very genuine praise as well, but then I think that that's also an issue when you're receiving praise. It's internalized, isn't it? It's something that, well, thank you, I appreciate that, but I don't feel that way. But actually, it's learning to accept the praise as well at times, and being like, right, okay,
Absolutely.
and not putting everything else on a pedestal, because everyone's probably struggling with the same sort of thing. And like you say, it's so widespread across the accessibility field that I know there's certifications and there's certain things that you can say, right, I've got this, these letters or this badge that says I know what I'm talking about, but you know what you're talking about for the meantime, and then it's a continuous learning platform anyway, isn't it? And
Absolutely.
we need to make mistakes to then learn from them. So yeah.
Yeah, and that's absolutely right. And I think, generally speaking, that's one of the things I think as a society we're quite bad at. And I think product and tech teams, in many organizations, whether it's internally or also externally, have a look on LinkedIn. Like, we share only about the wins. We rarely share about the failings or the parts that we are not doing so well about, which is exactly where we actually learn, and can find ways to do better, find the feedback to actually cope and potentially do better. And we are so bad at, like you said, accepting the praise and just taking it like it is, not arguing that no, your praise is not uh, worth what I feel it should be, in a way. And actually, one of the experts I've worked with on imposter syndrome told me that there's something that she nailed as a little bit of arrogance, that when you receive praise and you kind of like deflect or say something that is like, oh, it's not so true, and oh, I could do better or something like that. She called that a level of arrogance in that is very typical to a lot of people who feel imposter feelings quite a lot. So that's actually quite interesting. But also, yeah, just trying to learn from those moments that are not so great, and being able to communicate those, I think, could help a lot of people feeling less like imposters, because otherwise you only see the nice and bright and shiny things on social media and those big wins, and you go like, okay, there's no way I can achieve that, even though you could, but you just always feel like you're way far, like far from it, and that's not helping anyone, I think.
It's also true internally. So in larger organizations, I was having a conversation with someone. I'm not going to name drop them at the moment, but it may come up later. And they were saying they've got quite a small accessibility team, but they're a huge global organization. Tens of thousands of employees and billions of users as well. So that getting that commitment and that buy-in, but then having the praise either externally, if an external audit's been done, or someone's come in and said, oh, look, you're doing all of these things great. That doesn't then help to progress or self-preserve your role in that company, because some of the decision makers might go, oh, we're already doing all this, so why do you need budget for another resource? Like, you're
Exactly.
already doing such a good job, so just keep doing what you're doing and burn yourself out almost. So
Yes.
um, it's a real catch-22, isn't it? I think. But yeah, I think it's it's nice to share the wins, but sometimes it might actually give you a bit more leeway to sort of hold back on it a bit, and
I
sort of,
completely agree.
yeah. But I mean, so another phrase that just jumped into my mind, and I've been thinking of renaming the podcast, because as much as it says what it does on the tin, I think it's not very, I don't know, it's just not as fun as some other podcast names. And I don't know if this has been trademarked, or who came up with it, but progress over perfection. And I think that's exactly what we always talk about on the podcast. So, and it is accepting that it's constant progress, and we can strive for perfection, but nothing's ever going to be 100%
No,
perfect, is it?
absolutely. I think
So yeah.
that's an important one to always keep in mind, actually. As long as we move forward, that's the biggest win, actually, of them all. is this ability to always move in that direction of more inclusion and more accessibility.
Definitely. But awesome. Right. Sorry, I think I sort of gave you about 4 more questions on the back of that one. So moving on to the next one. We also had a really cool chat about how important it is to let people know that there are so many accessibility features available and built specifically with people with disabilities in mind or impairments. But they are actually just so useful for absolutely everyone. So it's like it doubles up on how incredible some of these things have been. Some people might know it as the curb cut effect, which was spoken about in a previous podcast episode. But do you think that that mindset can come into play and assist with the shifting of that culture when designing and developing new products or features for old products in moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. For me, the curb cut effect is so great to introduce accessibility to a wider audience that is not just like product and techies. For one reason for that being that it really helps making sure people understand that accessibility is not this mystical, unachievable beast that is impossible to understand or achieve. Curb cut is everywhere. We all actually know that once you can put the name on it and understand the history of it, actually, it really helps you understand, okay, there's something there that I've never really paid attention to, but helps me all the time. So the fact that it's like it can be found everywhere, it's there all the time, and actually it's when it's missing that you actually notice it, I think is quite interesting. And finally, I think the curb cut is really good about, is really helpful in making people understand that accessibility is not about token actions or charity. It's about just better experiences for everyone. So I know that in the workshops I've been hosting in the past 6 months, I always take the time to explain the curb cut. And actually, even before that, when I got into the accessibility world, I remember in a session with a crowd of engineers, which was, I can't remember, I think it was 200 engineers sitting in front of them virtually. And I was like, okay, let's do the curb cut. And actually, no one really knew about it, which blew my mind in actually both positive and negative ways. But yeah, I think it just really, really helps people shift their mentality when it comes to that. Actually, it's quite funny. Yesterday, I was on a call with 2 colleagues, one UX designer and one working on our design system as a developer. And we were just chit-chatting at the start of the call. And my colleague Liam, who's a web developer, mentioned that he hurt his shoulder and he was really struggling with his arm. And I made the joke, oh, how is it to work? And how is you using your laptop? How easy is it to use your laptop at the moment? And he was like, actually, I'm really struggling. I was like, interesting you say that. And then my other colleague, who's a senior UX designer, Denny, mentioned that she went mountain climbing recently and her legs are completely weak and very sore. And she was making a joke about the fact that she needs to control her food intake and liquid intake because her bathroom is upstairs. So she was really struggling with the stairs. And I was again like, how funny is it that we're on a meeting talking about accessibility checklists today and how to provide better experiences for our users. But those jokes aside, that's typically the kind of things that once I introduce the concept of a curb cut, people start thinking, okay, oh, this feature there is not just for me to make it easier when I go to the airport, or this feature there is not just so that I can park my car more easily. It's actually there primarily for someone else, but I never thought of that. So I think the curb cut really, really helps simplifying the definition of accessibility for a wider crowd. And I think when you think about it also from the perspective of a lot of people don't necessarily disclose their disability or an impairment or their neurodiversity, really understanding that some features there, you may not know who's using it, but it's there for someone, and you may never know that someone is there is really important. We know that especially in the workplace and the working environment, it's even more of a challenge for people to disclose because obviously of the fear of discrimination or repercussions when disclosing. So building that culture where those curb cuts exist for everyone in whichever manner that they can happen. I think it's super important to really build that culture. But I think for me, there's even one more step that is super important, which I think is really my biggest challenge and kind of like opportunity at the same time in my role, and probably one of the reasons why I'm so keen on making things work is when we get to this area of the world of work and employment. I can make my product and tech teams build more inclusively. I can work with them, train them, make sure that our platform is WCAG compliant, whatever those tick boxes could be and checkpoints could be. But if ultimately when a candidate applies for a role on our website and they never get invited for interviews or they never hear back from a recruiter, that I have an issue with personally, morally. And I think there's a big element of, yes, we can build that culture for us internally, but we also need our partners to follow us on that journey and be on board with it as well. Because if all the recruiters using our platforms ultimately don't hire more inclusively, I don't think I've really succeeded at my job. And it's a big mission. I'm not claiming that I can solve it at all, but if I can at least convince, I don't know, 10 recruiters to pay more attention to that and to actually attend one of our workshops, for example, that's already a big win because then they can talk about it as well with their peers and they can do something together. But I think unlocking a little bit of that piece of the puzzle would be incredibly incredibly important and would be really a strong step forward for everyone as such. And again, one of those curb cuts would be a little bit more helpful, I guess, quite simply.
It's really interesting. Obviously, I mean, a lot of our conversation is going to resonate with me being on the other end of the recruitment side of things. But yeah, I think the other thing is it just takes, like you say, that one person that's going to attend one of your labs or workshops and go back and talk about it, and they will reap the benefits, because hiring more inclusively isn't just the benefit of the applicant. They will see a higher return on their investment. They will open their talent pool exponentially to so many people that are disregarded for whatever reason. And you know, the proof will be in the pudding. You know, they will see that they'll make more hires. People will be happier in their roles. They'll be more appreciative as well that they've had that assistance to find something. So yeah, no, I mean definitely. And then the other thing that I wrote a note, so sorry, I wasn't ignoring you. Was that I think a lot of the times I've struggled with pushing accessibility to our clients or to prospect clients that I'd love to work with. And I find myself sometimes feeling like the accessibility police and being like, you have to do this because you're excluding so many people and it's the right thing to do. And think of all of these people that are experiencing barriers. But I mean, there's an element of that, obviously, that you need to include. But pushing that is just going to close more doors than it's going to open. They're not going to be willing to listen to you if you're just berating them. But explaining the benefits, and that is, you know, there will be a higher return on investment. You will open your talent pool. You will employ people that you never thought previously were available to you, and they are, and they're exceptional people that can do so much and so much more. So yeah, no, that really hits home. So sorry to just be like just
okay.
doubling down on your points. But also, yeah, the next sort of question. So you have achieved so much, obviously, in different areas in your time at Stepstone, and 9 years is great. I actually celebrated my 8 years with PCR Digital yesterday, so similar sort of time
Happy
frame.
anniversary.
Thank you very much. But most recently, you got a board level sponsor for accessibility, and you've been building and delivering the accessibility lab that we've mentioned briefly to your peers and colleagues at Stepstone. But you open that up to the Champions of Accessibility Network and some external sort of partners as well. So I was just so grateful that I was able to be someone to attend that and see, you know, what you're doing firsthand. So it was amazing. It was really engaging, really insightful. So if you could I know I'm asking a lot, but could you sort of give some insight on how that started and um, you've identified obviously the need for that and how it's going so far or plans to grow that out?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I was really glad that there was an opportunity for external champions to actually come and join, and I'm glad you could make it. That was fun, and actually for me, that was the nearly the feedback that I needed to understand whether that program actually of training was working, because I don't have an accessibility team, as people will have gotten by that point in the conversation. So to really understand whether that was actually valuable and as insightful as I was hoping it was, came with people like you coming and joining. So thank you for joining us on that day. I guess now is a good time to actually explain why in my role I sort of like decided to focus on accessibility. So when I took that role supporting our product and tech teams to build more inclusively, as I've mentioned, I had experience particularly with gender bias, but not only. And my experience with disability inclusion topics was very, very limited. And alongside that, at the same time, we were building our employee networks. And again, we didn't have a network focusing on disability inclusion either. So when I got into my role, I did a bit of an inventory of what we are doing in relation to diversity and inclusion in our product offering. There were areas that were clearly stronger than others, like gender equality, and there were some clear gaps like disability inclusion, but I didn't really know what to do at that time because I wasn't familiar enough with everything that's out there. So learning on the job, as we've mentioned. And it was quite interesting because somehow I actually can't remember the context, but I think it's one of my former colleagues having a relationship with AbilityNet. And there was a call, and because I've known people for a while and I've been in the business long enough, my role had been just about communicated actually internally, and I got roped into that call with a few colleagues from customer service, a couple of colleagues from product and technology. And there was an opportunity to do a maturity assessment. And it was actually really interesting, let's call it that, off the back of the call where everyone was in agreement, oh yeah, we need to do something about accessibility, but still having a little bit of resistance from the product leadership team that was present there. Like two people in very senior roles who have really they have the mandate and the remit to actually decides on moving forward with these kind of things, but they really were like passing the parcel. Like, oh yeah, we should do this. Oh yeah, but how about we do something else? And how about we are someone else? And how about and I was like, okay, we just can't do that forever because in 6 months' time we'll have the same conversation again. So I just sort of like decided to go forward with it. And that's how we started working with AbilityNet on a few things. And I'm sure we'll come to that again later anyway in terms of partnerships. But basically, we're in that situation where, okay, accessibility is going to be something that matters. How do we get there? Where is it that we need to get in the first place? So as I kind of like got more comfortable with the topic, as we actually did our first maturity assessment, I started to really understand the different tracks that I needed to implement for Stepstone and understanding, okay, how can I best support the product and tech teams in achieving that more inclusive product offering? And we started off with two main pillars, which was training and auditing, working hand in hand. We audit our product, we know where we fail, we know where we need to train our teams. They are better trained. We prove that with a positive audit outcome, hopefully. So that was really to build capability within the teams. But my primary audience was product and tech only. And I very quickly realized that this was limiting and that was too limited for me to actually achieve that because I needed also stakeholders in areas like HR, legal, the commercial teams to also know about what we are doing, what we are trying to achieve and help us get there. So we had a few opportunities to do dedicated training in product and tech, but I really felt like this was not enough. And even if we had that as a very strong basis, there was still something that was missing for me, which was that first basis, this alignment, the foundational part where we all understand with the same terminology, with the same concepts, what is it that we try to achieve. and making that as easy as possible for everyone to be able to have that conversation. They find each other in the office one day. They have the same language. They can talk about the aspiration together with the same knowledge. And doing those separate trainings, very specialist trainings, that didn't really help us get there. And that was always a tiny, tiny group because obviously you are limited in hosting trainings like that. So that really led me to think about, okay, how can I bring that common language across the organization and making sure everyone understands what we're trying to achieve and why we are also trying to achieve that, because there's various reasons. And actually with the time and with a little bit more knowledge and more confidence, we also, alongside that, and as I was building up that capability in product and tech, finally launching an employee resource group focusing on accessibility and disability inclusion. So we had those two elements that I could balance out because I was basically kind of like overseeing the activity for both. And I've been very, very proud to be the chair of our employee resource group until very recently. I'm handing over to very wonderful colleagues who will do an amazing job. And I was really trying to find a way, okay, how can we connect that employee resource group to the mission we have as a business? And actually, that's when I had the opportunity to speak with our Chief Financial Officer, Torsten, who had picked up an interest in the accessibility of our offices in Düsseldorf, which is where our headquarters is in Germany. And we had a chat and I was like, would you like to be our executive sponsor? And that was the easiest conversation with a CFO that ever happened. And it was really great because he had an interest and he was also very open and honest with me and the rest of the group that is leading the employee resource group at the time, that his knowledge was limited, but he was keen to learn and he wanted to have that opportunity to really grow into this executive sponsorship role alongside us as an organization and us as an employee group as well. So that really helped us simply put accessibility on the agenda across the entire organization, but I was still in the need of that training and common language ground. So what we did actually, and where the workshops really came to life for me, or the idea came to something that was becoming more and more tangible, is one, we managed to get Torsten over to London and visit the Google Accessibility Discovery Center. So I cannot stress enough how helpful it was for us to actually get there. And I thank Christopher Patno and the team there for welcoming us not only once, but twice that year. And really understanding what does it take to build that level of awareness and empathy for people. And even just spending half an hour there for Torsten really brought to the forefront the fact that there's a lot that exists. There's a lot of technology. We are a tech player in the recruitment industry. What is it that we can do to build that up? And for me, coming back to the office on that day, I was very much like, okay, how can I build a version of that is really tailored to our needs? And it's not just like, here's a room full of kids, figure it out. Because I knew that my teams needed kind of like the support and the guidance to get there. I then had the opportunity to bring a few colleagues, a dozen of colleagues, to a specific workshop actually there as well in the ADC. And what I noticed during those couple of hours we were there is simply just being exposed to, hey, here's an Android phone. Did you know all those accessibility settings exist? It just has this moment for people going like, oh, I didn't know. But, oh, I want to try that on this website I'm using, or I want to try how the color contrast of my website looks like when I apply those settings and tap. And it was just like the moment of realization that it doesn't really take a lot for people to start building the awareness, but even more so building the empathy and start thinking about how can I apply that myself. So based on that very long story, after a few months of kind of like refining the idea in my head, and because of a bit of a change in the org last year, I started 2024 going, okay, I'm going to pitch for this accessibility workshop. We'll see how we call them. We ended up calling them the Accessibility Lab. But I'm going to pitch for that, and that's going to be my key project for the year. And initially, I wanted to do a bit of a soft launch just to try it out. I ended up doing a hard launch, and it was done for the year. But it was good because actually what I expected to be a bit of a slow burn and something that needs a lot of like communication and, hey, I need to convince you, you need to attend this thing. Actually, as soon as we hit publish on our intranet, I had hundreds of signups.
Amazing.
That was shocking in a positive way, but it was shocking. And in reflection, what I understand basically is that people were keen to learn. They had an interest, but they had no way of voicing that interest that wouldn't feel like it's curiosity or it's misplaced, or because we had the employee resource group, but it's still an employee resource group. So you don't necessarily want to disclose either. You don't necessarily want to tell about your personal experiences. You may be in a non-tech role and you're not interested in the tech, but maybe you are caring for someone who has Parkinson's and you're actually keen to understand what does that mean on a daily basis for someone. Like the examples could be so many. So the Accessibility Lab really came to life in May of 2024, where we had our first sessions. And I think at the end of 2024, I tallied up about 250 colleagues across 5 locations who attended. And the way I set it up, because I can't have a permanent space for it, is basically a suitcase full of a kit. And the main point for me was to make sure that it's not too much of a product and tech workshop. So we go through the concept, we go through the definitions together. We basically start from zero. I really tell every participant, like, there's no expectations about what you need to know. We are going to learn together. And I learn stuff every single session myself as well. And the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive. The kind of like word of mouth about it as well has been really amazing. And that really has helped us build that accountability actually across the business, because people may not have the ability to go back to their desk the next day and say, I'm going to do a more accessible experience for my users or my stakeholders now. But they may be in a meeting with someone who mentions something that may not be very inclusive, and they can call it out in a way that is positive and helps us move forward as well. So that's the kind of like the story and the background for the Accessibility Lab to come to life for us. The plan in 2025 is to bring more external partners. As I've mentioned, clients, recruiters would be very, very important for me to bring into those sessions, and also people from the community as such, so that we can really build on those experiences or have tailored workshops, for example, with our UX teams and so on. But also we are a global organization, and I've targeted a few locations already, but I need to target a few more. So hopefully colleagues who are based, for example, in Belgium or in other locations in the UK or in Germany, as we have multiple offices there, will be able to also access that and kind of like join the army of accessibility champions we have across the organization. And I have to say, and really, like, all jokes aside, having an executive sponsor who is willing to learn and support, even in very quiet ways, not the kind of like big PR push or LinkedIn post, that is the most significant thing that could have happened for us in the last couple of years, to really build that ownership.
Yeah, it's incredible. And it's not always the case, is it? As you mentioned, you don't always sort of go, can we? Yes, yeah, that's fine. That would be the ideal world, right? But you still,
Absolutely.
as much as, yeah, that's a huge milestone, a huge thing that you need to achieve before you can sort of put things in place. The real work starts once you have the green light, and it's obviously taken so much work to get it to where it is. And I'm so pleased that it's such a success. I mean, it's understandable why it's such a success. I can say that because I've been there, but it's just, I mean, I like, because obviously you have these conversations, and I'm not a specialist myself, but I gain a lot of knowledge in the area. But something that was really stand out for me was the definition of sympathy versus empathy, and it was really just like, oh my God, like, even just using the right sort of terminology, because sometimes I might be like, oh, I feel so sympathetic towards someone that can't do X, Y, and Z. But actually, it's putting yourself in the shoes rather than feeling like, oh, poor you, sort of thing. It's actually, no, imagine myself, and then, right, what could we do to sort of help? And yeah, that was it was one of very many standout points. Sorry, that's not the only takeaway.
Thank you. Thank you. And actually, if I can add, off the back of having a few champions like you coming in December, I've received a number of messages from colleagues. Actually, also the CAN meetup, that's the LinkedIn Champions of Accessibility Network, led by Gareth, Charlie, and Heather, hosted in July in the Stepstone office, actually in London. I've gotten so many messages from people in accessibility roles in various organizations trying to really unlock that sort of opportunities for themselves. And one of the things that comes back quite a lot is about cost. And I know that when I visited the ADC, I was thinking, okay, there are some stuff there we can't afford. But there's a few things I was just turning to Tim, my colleague who's head of IT, and I was like, is there any chance I can get a few like old laptops and old mobile phones and just use that for the workshops? I was like, yeah, probably should be fine. And obviously it was fine. But also all the other pieces of kit that we have there, like we have plenty of things like Lego Braille. We recently got playing cards with Braille on. We have a few books. We have visual impairment simulation glasses. Like there's plenty of very different things. And by the way, yesterday I found out that a steady spoon, which is something that has a way to balance the kind of like the bowl of a spoon, for a baby costs €8. For an adult costs €90. And that is one of the things that really annoyed me this week. I just wanted to mention it. I think I have the right audience to complain about that.
Yeah, definitely.
But
That's insane. Yeah.
all in all, building up the kit doesn't really cost a lot of money. And I think, again, to our points earlier around imposter feelings, when you see some organizations doing those amazing, shiny workshops and all of that, it may feel overwhelming. And actually, when you go into the details of it, it's not that bad. And there's an opportunity to do something. So if there's one thing also that I would love to debunk for people in this kind of like industry and that trying to build the awareness across their organization, is that it doesn't have to cost you a lot of budget, and the actual budget request may not be that big. So that I think is something that is really important to know as well.
That's incredible bit of advice, because I think a lot you see I mean, not to discount, the investment and the effort that goes in by companies like Google, but also, I mean, NHS have rolled out accessibility labs as well, more recently, and I know that it helps with the marketing of things like that. So you say, oh, look how much we've invested in this to, progress in this area, but that doesn't help, like you say, people that may not have access to those types of budgets to be able to implement something globally or across the whole company. But that's it's really, really good to hear that, I mean, a lot of what you had was the knowledge and the time investment. So I guess that's the sort of probably the most expensive and valuable part of it. And that's the crux of it, really. As much as those things can help to gain that understanding, I think that the knowledge that you've put into there and transferring that in an effective way is the main thing. So no, love that. But then talking about investment, and that you're the only person really with the sort of accessibility title at Stepstone Group at the moment, or don't have a team. Do you? I believe that you work with some external sort of third-party consultancies, and you mentioned AbilityNet previously with some of the more hands-on sort of needs throughout the group. When it comes to sort of creating those partnerships, what factors do you think are critical for companies aiming to incorporate more accessibility into their sort of digital transformations? What do they need to sort of consider?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question. It's one that I've reflected on in the past couple of years quite a lot. So for us, it all started with AbilityNet, and I have to say I've been so happy to work with them. Not only because what they provided us with in terms of those different deliverables, whether it's training, audits, the maturity model, it was done in a way that really worked for us, and particularly the audits deliverables for us have been absolutely perfect in terms of what it looked like and what it helps us achieve further on. But also just the support of the team, generally speaking. I never felt at any point, starting from zero in the accessibility world, like I was asking a silly question or I was kind of like not really clear what I was doing or anything like that. They really helped me grow into my role without being any sort of like, without dictating to us what we need to achieve, without being patronizing about what we were achieving, without ever making us feel bad. And I think at the moment there's a bit of a risky game in the market of accessibility because a lot of businesses are panicking about the European Accessibility Act, and a lot of businesses are trying to take advantage of that. And it's really quite shocking, I have to say, the number of uninformed decisions, I would say, that are being made at the moment by plenty of businesses when it comes to accessibility compliance, because not everyone has the time or the energy or the willingness to build a more accessible culture, but they will want to be compliant probably because they will be scared of the fines, particularly, and the reputational risks. But I think for me, that's also where being very diligent about who you partner with is super important. I know that I've always had experiences working with agencies or, for example, in the creative side, and I don't want to just work with someone who can help me deliver the outputs. I actually really want to have a good relationship with them, learn from them, be able to really be comfortable when I share feedback, that they can give me feedback as well. I really see it as a partnership, even though it probably sounds like a bit of a buzzword and all of that. But it's really that it's a two-way street. I don't see it as I give you money, there's a transaction, you give me the output that I requested in the brief. And for me, working with AbilityNet has very much been that. And I've learned so much working with them and putting together those training programs for the teams and so on. And I think there's a lot that is boiling down to the fact that AbilityNet is also a charity. It's not a for-profit organization. So I think there's an element there that they really care because that's who they are as such as an organization. And I know that there's a lot of disability-owned businesses as well in this industry, and there's plenty of agencies and consultancy also invested in that. I have to say, they are not paying me for saying that, but AbilityNet for me really has been the most steady partner because I've been consistently pleased with what they helped us with. And sometimes other organizations are also quite reputable in the industry. I have to say, I've not been so impressed. So obviously that for me, when, I don't know, I convince a team very laboriously that they need to have an accessibility training and the accessibility training itself is not very accessible, I feel let down. And that's a bit of a shame because that then doesn't put that barrier down for that team. It actually makes it even bigger and stronger. And then that's harder for me to then move forward with that team. So I think there's a lot of due diligence that needs to be done for organizations that are really serious about building that capability in their business, not just ticking off a box and saying, okay, I can report that I've trained 25 people in my UX team on accessibility. So obviously it depends what people expect and want to achieve. But I think for me, yeah, that element of whether you can work with a charity or a disability-owned organization in the first place is super important because also that's very needed. And also understanding what is it that you're trying to achieve. I think there will be times, I know there will be times where I need to work with other organizations than AbilityNet because I have too many requests and they can't keep up with my nonsense. For example, potentially, hopefully not. But I think that element of being careful what you do is extremely important. Also because you want to trust the advice, the guidance, the training that is being given. And I have to say that sometimes I've seen organizations sharing advice that I'm like, I don't think that's quite right. And other people commenting on that. And I think that's super scary, especially, like I said, with all the scaremongering that is going around at the moment. I'm one of the people who thinks like slow progress is better than just progress at any cost, I guess.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And I'm pleased that you mentioned, obviously, I mean, I'm so pleased that you've had that experience with AbilityNet as well. And I I very rarely hear any bad things about any of the consultancies out there that provide accessibility services. But it's nice to hear that you've found that and it works for you as well. Because I guess what they do for you might not work for other companies, like you say. If they're
Absolutely.
more technical or complex sort of things that need to be done, then there may be others out there. I know that there are others out there. I won't. I feel like we're almost sponsored by AbilityNet in this episode now, so I'll have to quickly move on to the next question.
Maybe
um,
we get invited to TechShare Pro.
well, that would be lovely, wouldn't it? And that's a very good segue. So thank you. I really appreciate the help here in moving me on to the next question, which is you were on a panel discussion at last year's TechShare Pro, which was kind of very standout, I think, across the board. I think so many people fed back about this particular panel, and it was on burnout and how commonplace it is, unfortunately, within the accessibility field. So um, I guess not to take too much more of your time up, but do you mind approaching that again and just giving our listeners a bit more insight on how you manage burnout, and any advice on what managers can be doing to identify that in their teams?
Yeah, I'm very happy to. It's a tough topic for various reasons. It's also one that really infuriates me because I think that as a society, I guess we don't do enough to prevent burnout or to help people recovering from their burnouts. Um, it's just infuriating, really. Um, I know that myself, I've burnt out in my previous role for various reasons, and I think things usually come together. Like something doesn't feel quite right at work, something won't feel quite right in your personal life, and everything will come together, and it's just like that climax of a moment where I just go like, oh, nothing is quite right now. But you may not actually verbalize it like that, and you may not even notice that it's burning you out. Um, I think there's also a lot around burnout that is misunderstood. I know that just before we had the TechShare Pro conference session, I read, I think the night before, someone commenting on social media saying that burnout is just happening to people who don't like their job. And I think nothing could be furthest from the reality than that.
Wow.
I think, especially in the world of accessibility, it comes from caring a lot. I don't know if we can care too much, but there's a lot about caring a lot about what you are doing, not necessarily on a personal level, but on that more kind of like wider perspective as such. So, like I said, I burnt out in my previous role. I almost burnt out last year. I do admit. And at the start of the texture procession, for those who've seen it, we had that expert calling out the different symptoms and all that. And I remember sitting there watching the video, being like, yeah, ticking that
Oh.
box. Also, oh, this one, oh yeah. But also in reflection, I knew that I was not really like at the maximum of my capacities at that time. One reason being tired, generally speaking, but not just the physical tiredness, I guess. And actually, preparing for a conversation today, I remember at some point last year in one of my work trips, being back in my hotel room after an event or something like that, chatting on WhatsApp with one of my colleagues and friends, and actually just bursting into tears. And I was like, okay, I need to figure it out. I need to understand better what's going on right now. So for me, usually as if it's a habit. When I burnt out the first time and when I nearly burnt out the second and third time, I the main things that I noticed was for me, I completely withdrew from social activity, engaging with friends, family, just avoiding conversation with pretty much everyone. When I was still working from an office permanently, I remember always putting my headphones on, which I usually do to get in the zone when I need to, but I was just putting them on without any sort of music, even though I love listening to music all the time, just so that people avoid approaching me, really. I wasn't eating correctly. I was basically going to work, doing my job, getting back home, going to bed, waking up, going to work, and so on and so on. So it was really, really intense in that sense. And I also started having very mild panic attacks as well. But the flip side of that is my work was excellent each time. Like last year was very good for me from a work perspective. When I burnt out the first time, I did some of the best campaigns at the time, but it was just not, something was just wearing me down so much. So I think really getting people to understand that burnout is not about doing a bad job and messing up with what you're supposed to do. It may display like that for some people. It may happen that actually their performance is dropping. But for a lot of people, what I've seen and what I heard from others as well is that it just remains the same. Or like you absorb more and you want to do more and you actually say no to nothing. So I think there's a lot around understanding how it really affects people, and as a manager, noticing those things that really put people closer to that edge. I think there's a lot around setting up expectations, and I think especially in the world of accessibility, we all want to achieve something that is really great, and that element of progress over perfection is true, but you always, like, your definition of progress may vary quite a bit from person to person or organization to organization, and understanding that what is a small win, what is a big win, are they actually all big wins, and we just consider them that. I think there's a lot that also has to be thought about to really put the expectations in the right places and not burn out because of that as well.
Yeah.
And I think also to our points around imposter, I think there's a bit of a connection with that as well, because in a lot of our roles, we feel like it's not enough or it's meaningless or I could do better and so on. And that also, again, doesn't help with feeling that we are doing the right thing. So there's plenty of reasons. There's also obviously the element of what happens outside of work that could be affecting people, and that's also very important. But one thing I would stress, and that I've always stressed to people when we talk about burnout, is taking a break from work doesn't solve it for everyone all the time. I know that the usual thing that people say is like, oh, your job is just your job. You're not like you're not a doctor. You're not saving lives. That's not the point. It's just not the point. Telling me to take a day off, that's not the point, because actually for a lot of people, and I was in this situation, work was my only anchor. That was the only thing that I could control. That was the only thing that I could really like do what I knew I could do with. And that was the one thing that I needed in my day. Being away from it wouldn't have helped me at the time, I know. So if some people need that as a manager, please give them the space to have that. But it may be that actually someone needs a lazy day at home so they can just recuperate a little bit from a physical perspective and then go back to things. It may be that actually you need to carve in your work week more breaks, proper lunch breaks, going out for a run, for a walk, for whatever actually you fancy. I know that the first time I burnt out, one of the things that started kind of like bringing me back to who I was and how I wanted to feel like more often was actually to just say to myself, not to anyone, oh, I've been in the UK for X number of years now. I love football. I've never been to a Premier League game. I live 10 minutes away from a football ground. I'm going to find a ticket and go to a match on my own and just enjoy it. And
Oh, amazing.
it's sometimes it would be simple things like that. It could be that you want to go see a movie or go to a show or whatever, or take a small trip somewhere for a few days. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that it's the thing that actually will make a difference for that person, and it can take very different shape and form for people. So I think that's the main thing for managers or colleagues who are seeing someone struggling in their team. Just notice the change in behavior call it out without sugarcoating it as well, which is one of my pet peeves, especially in British working culture. I'm sorry, I'm very French when it comes to that. I don't think being direct and clear means you are being mean. And
No.
that's one of the kind of like stereotypes, I think, probably that I'm trying to combat a lot. Don't sugarcoat it, call it out, be clear, notice what you see. Don't try to come up with solutions straight away. Don't go like, oh, I've noticed your performance is dropping. I'm going to help you with your performance now. Or actually, you are very tired at the moment. Take a day off. Like that is not always going to be the right solution for that person. So giving space, I think itself is something that people need to also work on. It doesn't mean take the day off or take an hour break. It means remove the noise around me so I can focus on me, what I need to do, and making sure I can do that in the best possible way. And I think, again, to some of the points we've mentioned earlier, give people validation and tell them when they are doing something good. Don't wait once a year for like performance reviews to tell them they are doing a good job, and do that even if you're not their manager. You may be just a peer attending one workshop or attending one meeting, and something that has been said in a way that makes you feel very good, that you felt was very powerful, or whatever it can be. Tell them that, because those tiny bits of validation will help people feel better in their own skin, I think, in their own work. And beyond that, just help feel better, quite simply, I would say. So I think there's plenty of symptoms that people may not be watching out for too much. And it's very hard when you're in that situation to go like, oh, what is going on? I know that I've spent weeks telling people when I burnt out, I'm tired. And they would just like, oh yeah, just get more sleep.
Yeah.
But I'm not talking this kind of tired.
So thank you so much for sharing all of that as well, and your personal experience, because it can take a lot and bring a lot up. So I just appreciate, yeah. And then I guess to reciprocate in a way, I've previously had to leave a role because of burnout, mental issues, all in the past now, thank God. But there was I think it felt like, from my perspective, looking back, my passion and my interest in my role was being taken advantage of, because they knew I was willing to go above and beyond my hours or capacity. You end up making excuses for yourself, which you shouldn't have to apologize for if you're already going above and beyond and there's no more you can do. And then people then will they'll misconstrue that and set unrealistic expectations for you going forward. Just because you're giving it your all for an extended period of time doesn't mean that that's maintainable for the long term. And I really appreciate you saying the time off isn't a solution. And I think that goes back to the sympathy versus empathy, because you're sympathetic of how you think someone's feeling, and you've gone, this will solve everything because I'd like a day off. So they're not considering actually everything else that might be going on around you, and they're not being empathetic. It's a sympathetic thing. It's nice that, I guess, some people might appreciate, oh, they're being really flexible and giving me some time. But that could contribute to a relapse. That could contribute to, oh, well, I've taken this extended, because that's what happened with me. I was actually on the cusp of a promotion. I was signed off with anxiety and stress for, I think it ended up being about 3 weeks. And nothing was really done in that time to support me for my return. And then I asked for a flexible return engagement. As soon as I was back in that office, it was bang, 9-10 hours. It's back to normal. And I was like, okay, I don't think I was ready to come back. But then I just had so from promotion and doing really well and being recognized for good work to I have to leave and completely change my career path was the result of mismanagement. Maybe I'm not going to obviously state where it was or what company, but I think there's a lot that we need to do to recognize and be more empathetic for people and how they're feeling in their roles.
I agree. Thank you for sharing as well.
No, that's fine. I mean, I just, it's only fair, right? So yeah, I guess I mean thank you so much as always, Mim, for your time today.
My
And all
pleasure.
those questions. I know I've thrown more than the sort of pre-planned six that I sent you initially.
It's okay.
But for now, I guess final thoughts. If there's anything else that you'd really like to share, or anything coming up, like initiatives or personal projects, or anything you're like passionate about, that would be really cool to hear about.
Well, thank you for having me. Really enjoyed spending that hour with you, and I hope people listening and watching will have enjoyed also.
Oh, they will.
Oh, thankfully, hopefully. I guess I don't know. From the side of the job, as I've mentioned, for me the objective is to grow a little bit my army of Stepstone accessibility champions. So if you're a Stepstoner listening, please get in touch if we haven't spoken already, and really build on the what we've achieved in 2024, because progress is what we are aiming for. I actually have plans with a few colleagues to organize a few in-person meetups for Global Accessibility Awareness Day in May. So watch out for that. Hopefully that's something that gets sorted and organized smoothly as well, because that would be super cool also. And yeah, I guess from a personal perspective, I've been looking at ways to again widen my accessibility knowledge, and I've been toying with the idea of taking a sign language course. So I'm holding myself accountable on this chat today to actually look for my options and see where I can learn French Sign Language in this year, because I think that would be super nice actually, and a good way to build more empathy as well, to bring that back to that very important topic.
Definitely. Oh, that's amazing. And it's funny. So I'm going to do the same thing because I've got a friend that teaches British Sign Language, and she's been saying for months, I'm going to give you like just come on the course. It's all remote. Like you can whenever you're free. And myself and my wife Ashley have been like, we'd love to, like we've always desired to do it, but we just haven't. I say haven't had the time. We haven't given it the time it deserves. So um, I'll hold myself accountable, and then hopefully, yeah,
Oh,
we'll both see how our progress goes.
nice. We can keep each other accountable for that now.
Definitely. There you go. Fair again, just trying to be fair and open.
That's great. Thank you so much, Joe.
Oh, you're more than welcome. So yeah, thank you again, and I'm sure we'll speak and meet again more throughout the year. So yeah, looking forward to
Absolutely.
that. Thanks again to Mim for her time today, and to all of our listeners. If you'd like to learn any more about the topics we've discussed, then links will be made available and resources, or you can feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. See you on the next one.